He once stood in the spotlight, where his voice could bring thousands of people to tears. Yet his death came in silence, alone, unnoticed. A heartbreaking paradox. The man who gave comfort to an entire generation could not find a way out for himself. On the day he passed, the scene inside his room left many shaken. It wasn't just the silence. It was the little details that never seemed to add up. A hastily scribbled note, conflicting fragments in eyewitness accounts, and the lingering question, was this simply the tragedy of loneliness, or was something hidden from view? For years, fans have argued. Some say it was the final choice of a weary soul. Others believe there was an invisible hand behind it all. What truly happened? Stay with us as we follow each trace. Chapter 1. A hard childhood plants the seeds of a rebel star. One evening in Bell Gardens, Eddie Cochran was just 16. He sat on the front steps of his house, his guitar by his side, staring into the darkness of the yard. A close friend remembered. He mumbled, almost like talking to himself, "I don't think I'll live long." It might have sounded like a throwaway line, a joke from a restless teenager. But with Eddie, it carried a strange weight, as if he already knew. Looking back, people would ask themselves, was he sensing something no one else could? To understand that whisper, you have to return to where Eddie's story began, the small town of Albert Lea, Minnesota. On October 3rd, 1938, Raymond Edward Cochran was born into a working-class Oklahoma family with 5 children. The cold of the Midwest cut deep, but inside their modest home, the radio always played country music. By 1951, when Eddie was 13, the family packed up and left Minnesota in search of a better life. They landed in Bell Gardens, a poor suburb on the edge of Los Angeles. This was not glamorous Hollywood. The streets were dusty, lined with factory workers and immigrant families squeezed into small houses. But here, Eddie began to discover his language, music. He tried the school band. At first, he wanted to play drums, but was told to learn piano instead. He tried trombone, then clarinet. His teacher urged him to be patient, but Eddie was blunt. "I'd rather quit than play this." At just 12, he was already pushing against the rules. One day, Eddie asked his older brother to show him a few guitar chords. From then on, he locked himself away for hours with a cheap chord book. No lessons, no teachers. He learned by ear, by instinct. A friend recalled, "We'd never seen anyone so determined." His fingers bled, but he laughed and said, "That's when it feels like real music." In Bell Gardens, Eddie soon bonded with Conrad Guybo Smith, a boy who played the upright bass. Together, they formed a little group called the Melody Boys. They performed at military gatherings, church socials, small events where few paid attention. But for Eddie, every chance to step on stage was one step further from poverty. There was a detail few knew. Even at 16, Eddie often muttered that he didn't think he'd live long. One friend remembered a night on the porch when Eddie said quietly, "I just want to play music until there's no time left." It might have sounded like youthful rebellion, but in hindsight, it became a haunting echo. At that same age, Eddie dropped out of school to perform with Hank Cochran. No relation, just a shared last name. They called themselves the Cochran Brothers. 2 teenage boys traveling bar to bar, playing in rundown clubs along the West Coast. The pay was meager, sometimes barely enough to eat. But Eddie had made up his mind. No school, no factory work, only music. Years later, an old friend reflected, even before fame, Eddie always carried something unsettled inside him, like he was racing against the clock. Can you imagine it? A boy of just 16, guitar in hand, eyes burning with determination, yet speaking openly about death, about not living long. Was it only the bravado of a rebellious teenager? Or was it truly a glimpse of fate? And so the question lingers. From the very beginning, did Eddie Cochran already know his life would never be as long as everyone else's? Chapter 2. The Spotlight and the Shadows Behind It. In 1956, while Jane Mansfield lit up the silver screen, a young man appeared for only a fleeting moment. Just a few seconds, but those seconds would mark his destiny. With slicked back hair and a guitar in his hands, Eddie Cochran sang 20 Flight Rock. The music pulsed with energy, his eyes full of mischief. The audience stirred, though no one yet knew his name. Eddie was only 18, a studio guitarist who happened to catch the attention of a director who gave him this chance. It was a small break, but it opened the door to an entire career. Yet from the very beginning, there was a scar. 20 Flight Rock wasn't written by Eddie. He was given a co-writing credit, but no royalties, nothing more than a name on paper. That's Hollywood, someone from the studio remarked. But for Eddie, it was his first hard lesson. That fame always came with the cost of injustice. Not long after, he signed with Liberty Records. His single Sittin' in the Balcony climbed into the top 20 on Billboard. The boy from Bell Gardens was suddenly the next Elvis. Magazines splashed his smiling face, his polished hair. But behind the curtain, Eddie often stared into the mirror and whispered to a close friend, "I write, I sing, but someone else takes the money." Nights in Los Angeles, he would sit in his cramped apartment, strumming his guitar, staring at thick contracts filled with language he couldn't trust. "Rock and roll will kill us," he sighed once. "It swallows you whole and spits you out." Caught in this storm, Eddie crossed paths with Jerry Capehart, a man who didn't sing well, didn't play well, but was clever and ambitious. "You handle the music, I'll handle the business," Capehart promised. Eddie agreed. Perhaps he believed that with someone in his corner, he wouldn't be crushed by the industry. But Capehart quickly became a shadow at his back, making decisions for him, from the songs he recorded to the shows he played. Some old friends whispered, Jerry looked at Eddie like a gold mine. And yet, in just 2 short years, this high school dropout had a top 20 hit and thousands of fans. He was stepping into film studios, photo shoots, glittering stages. But he also came to understand what it meant to be used, what it meant when your very name became a commodity. In the scattered notes he left behind, a haunting line appeared. "I'm afraid of losing myself in all this noise." The irony is almost unbearable. That fleeting scene in the film, 20 Flight Rock, later became the song Paul McCartney used to impress John Lennon, planting the seed that would grow into the Beatles. Eddie never knew. He never knew that a moment he wasn't properly paid for would help launch the greatest band of the century. Was Eddie Cochran bound by fate from the start, when the very song that gave him his first break also foretold the injustice and the brevity of his life? Chapter 3. Brilliant Success and the Shadow of a Short Life. In 1958, just 3 minutes of music called Summertime Blues turned an unknown young man into the voice of America. The song shot up the charts, and fans hailed him as the new symbol of youth. But while a generation saw an untouchable idol, Eddie Cochran began to hear something else, a warning echo that his success might soon become a trap. Under the stage lights, his face shone. But behind the colored beams was a darkness no one could touch. Endless tours, flight after flight, a new crowd every night. Backstage, he often sat alone, cradling his golden Gretsch guitar as if it were his only anchor. "I don't even know who I'm singing for anymore," he confided quietly to a friend. Amid the roaring applause, he began to hear his own silence. The music industry was merciless. Royalty contracts bound him tight, with most of the profits going straight to the label, while Eddie received only scraps. Once, in anger, he tore a song draft to shreds and threw it in the trash. We're nothing but puppets. To others, it looked like a tantrum. But in his eyes, there was something deeper, as if he already knew the cost. In a notebook, discovered later, a line was scrawled across the page. "If I can't escape Capehart, my music will die before I get the chance to live." No one knew when it was written, or exactly what it meant. But from then on, his relationship with Jerry Capehart, the manager who controlled everything from Eddie's money to his schedule, even his friendships, became a subject of whispers. Some said Capehart was like a shadow, always present, heavy and unshakable. By 1959, Eddie was sharing the stage with Buddy Holly, Gene Vincent, and Ricky Nelson. It was the height of glory, but he began refusing shows, preferring to lose himself in the studio, experimenting with new guitar sounds. He seemed worried, like someone was watching him, one technician remembered. At times, Eddie laughed for no reason, then fell silent, as if hearing something no one else could. One night in Philadelphia, with thousands cheering, Eddie suddenly stopped mid-song. He looked into the microphone and whispered, "I don't know how much time I have left." The crowd thought it was a joke and roared with applause. But those who stood close swore his eyes told a different story. There was nothing playful in them. Some say that after that show, Eddie received a strange letter, unsigned, with no return address. He tucked it into his jacket, never letting anyone see what was inside. Days later, interviews were canceled without warning. The official reason was exhaustion. But backstage, one fellow musician recalled, Eddie kept turning that envelope over and over in his hands, as if it weighed more than any guitar he had ever carried. So was this only the fatigue of a 20-year-old star? Or was it the signal of a tragedy already waiting just beyond the curtain? Chapter 4. Love, Betrayal, and Hidden Loneliness. In his 20s, Eddie Cochran stepped into a world he'd only dared to imagine. Hotel suites lined with mirrors, gleaming Cadillac convertibles, and endless nights of champagne surrounded by Hollywood starlets. In Los Angeles, he owned his own home with a bright blue swimming pool, a place where friends gathered every weekend. With a single phone call, he could buy anything he wanted, from a brand new guitar to a sudden flight to Paris. The American dream that so many longed for was now in the hands of a young man barely past 20. But what audiences never saw was that behind those walls, Eddie rarely slept in peace. One manager recalled, he was always wound tight, like a string about to snap. After a show, it was whiskey, then cigarettes, then back to writing songs. It was as if he believed that pausing for even a minute would make everything slip away. Inside the suitcase Eddie carried from city to city, alongside his stage clothes and demo tapes, there was always a stack of crumpled pages. Scribbled words ran across them, sometimes song ideas, sometimes lines that made little sense. "I'm not sure I'll get that far." Or, "If one day I disappear, will the music keep me alive?" To outsiders, they were nothing more than scattered thoughts. But to those who read them later, they felt chilling. Signs of an unease Eddie seemed to carry deep within him. Between tours, the record company tightened its grip. They demanded more shows, more hits, more contracts. Eddie was hailed as a money machine, a label that made him feel less like a man and more like a product. He smiled on stage, signed hundreds of posters, and then sat alone in a dark hotel room. Friends saw the contradiction clearly, a lively, witty Eddie in the spotlight, and a quiet Eddie who left parties early, staring at nothing for hours. Gene Vincent remembered. He once whispered, "We're burning too bright, and fire never lasts forever." Fans believed they were watching an immortal young star. But to Eddie, that light was both a triumph and a warning, a reminder that the price of fame could arrive far sooner than anyone expected. Chapter 5. Luxury Cars, a Sudden Coffin. In the spring of 1960, Eddie Cochran crossed the Atlantic for a tour of England. For the young crowds of London, he was a spark lighting up the dance halls. Tickets sold out, screams filled the air, and the press called him America's Elvis in Europe. Eddie kept smiling, kept giving his all, yet those closest to him sensed a change. He often spoke of death, of a cycle that never stopped. On the night of April 16th, after a show in Bristol, Eddie left with Gene Vincent and his girlfriend Sharon Sheeley in a taxi bound for London. The sky was dark, rain misted the narrow highway, and the pavement glistened with water. Their Ford Consul sped through the night, the streetlights few and far between. At a sharp bend, the driver lost control. The car slammed into a light pole, the sound echoing like thunder. Witnesses later said that in the chaos, Eddie was the only one who reached out to shield Sharon. The impact threw him through the car door, his head striking the pavement. Gene was badly injured. Sharon knocked unconscious, but Eddie lay still. When police and paramedics arrived, he was found with a tiny plastic toy guitar still strapped across him, a gift from a young fan only days earlier. He had once joked, "I'll keep it as a lucky charm." Eddie was rushed to St. Martin's Hospital, but the head injury was too severe. Only hours later, at the age of 21, he was gone. The shock deepened when police searched his suitcase from that night. Among the scattered notes was a scribbled line, "Never to see 22." Was it coincidence? Or had he left behind a prophecy of his own fate? The crash did more than take a gifted young musician. It left behind questions that have never fully been answered. Why did the car lose control? Was it truly just slick roads, or something else left unspoken? And those words in his suitcase, were they only fragments of thought, or the evidence of a secret he never had the chance to reveal? Chapter 6. The official report and its unsettling gaps. News of Eddie Cochran's death spread like lightning across the world. Overnight, from London to Los Angeles, people were stunned. He was only 21. Thousands of young fans in England wept outside the Bristol hospital where he took his last breath. To them, Eddie wasn't just a singer. He was a symbol of rebellion, a fiery guitar that broke every rule. And yet, almost immediately, his death was shadowed by doubt. British newspapers reported simply, "car accident," but details did not add up. The driver of the Ford Consul was charged with reckless driving, yet his sentence was quickly reduced, fueling whispers that someone wanted the case closed quietly. Some die-hard fans even believed Eddie was cursed, the third in a strange chain of young musicians tied to the same London hotel room, where Buddy Holly and others had stayed before meeting their own untimely ends. Eddie Cochran's legacy rests on more than a handful of hits like Summertime Blues or Come On Everybody. He planted seeds for an entire generation. The Beatles, the Rolling Stones, even Led Zeppelin later named him as an influence. In America, his memory faded for years. But in England, the country where he fell, his name was revered like a saint of rock and roll. The most haunting discovery came from the scraps of paper in his suitcase. Alongside the line, "Never to see 22," were fragmented phrases, "green lights on a strange road," and "a car that will not stop." Were they merely the ramblings of a restless mind? Or did Eddie sense what was coming? Did he see something on that tour he never dared to say out loud? Today, when people remember Eddie Cochran, they still picture the young man with a guitar in hand, his voice raw but defiant. Yet behind the glow remains a riddle that has never been solved. Was it only a tragic accident, or something more deliberate, hidden in plain sight? And the final, most painful question still lingers. Could Eddie Cochran have lived differently if on that rainy English night he had simply chosen not to step into that car? Epilogue. A life cut short, a mystery, unresolved. In a quiet English cemetery, Eddie Cochran's grave is marked by a modest stone. Only his name, the years 1938 to 1960, and a single dash in between. Yet that dash holds everything. A poor boyhood, a blazing youth, and an ending so abrupt that no one has ever fully understood it. At the time, newspapers called it a tragic accident. A taxi lost control, a barrier snapped, and a 21-year-old star was gone. But for many, the unease never stopped there. Those who were with him that night remembered details that didn't fit. A strange light flashing through the windshield, an impact far too violent for the speed, and the eerie silence of the official report. Some close friends believed Eddie had been caught in something larger than a crash, an invisible hand, a deliberate act that no one dared name. What chills the most is that Eddie himself had often said, "I don't think I'll live long." Once those words were repeated, they sounded less like youthful drama and more like prophecy. Was it only the instinct of a restless soul, or had he truly glimpsed his fate? Eddie left this world just as his career was reaching its peak. He never lived to see rock and roll sweep across the globe, never knew that his own songs would light the way for the Beatles, the Stones, and an entire generation to come. His unfinished life, in a strange way, made him immortal. In every chord, in every raw guitar break, we still hear the breath of a man racing against destiny. Perhaps that is the deepest paradox. Eddie Cochran died too young, and yet because of that, he has never truly disappeared. He lingers in the air, in memory, in the haunting suspicion that behind that accident lies a truth still hidden. And the final question remains, suspended in time. Was it blind fate that took him, or a secret history that has never been revealed?